So again, remember this year in October, on the 13th and from the 13th to the 15th, we're going to be having our conference. We have our 57th National and 3rd International Asopapi Conference, which will take place at Universidad Católica Luis Amigo. All the information that you may need, you can find it. You can find our social media and also in our website. We're going to start, let me see if there are more people in the waiting room. We're going to start our webinar today with Professor Aida Aguirre. Thank you, Aida, for joining us today. And we are very glad that you accepted this invitation to be with us. So let me give you a brief introduction about Aida. Aida has a degree in Spanish and English and a master's degree in education. She has worked as an intern teacher of Spanish for foreigners and also as a CLIO and a PBL teacher in elementary schools. She's currently teaching English to adults. Her line of research is development of materials from an critical intercultural perspective. Aida is also part of the SIG, which is a special interest group. Asocopi has different special interest groups, and one of those groups is materials design, which is led by Professor Astrid Núñez Pardo. Aida is one of her former students in the master's program, and Aida is here today representing her special interest group, or SIG. Remember that if you want to know about the other SIGs that we have, you can also find them in our website. So Aida, welcome. This is a very interesting topic. We are now 14 people in the room and expecting more people to come. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Adriana, and thank you, Asocopi, for having me. I'm so happy to be here. And well, I hope you enjoy the presentation. And of course, I hope it is useful for you. So give me a sec, I share my screen. Okay. Are you guys seeing my screen now? Yep. Yes. Okay, good. So today's presentation is about developing materials for critical interculturality. So the objectives that I want to share with you today are to briefly examine the concept of critical interculturality in language teaching, of course, from the respect for diversity and for the groups that belong to diverse communities. Also, keep in mind that interculturality is a very complex and multifaceted concept. So this is just an approach, and the invitation is to read more and get informed about this topic. Next, we're going to understand how can teachers develop decolonized materials on diversity issues to foster critical intercultural awareness. And to comprehend this better, I'm going to show you the worksheets that I designed with the help of my 4th graders, and they were the result of my thesis work. And if we have time, I will also like to share a lesson plan for teens and adults that I created for the language academy I'm currently working for, so that we can have a broader picture of how to do that. Good. To start, guys, I'd like you to participate on a Mentimeter that I created by answering these 2 questions. What does interculturality mean to you? And if you include it in your class, how? So I'm going to stop here in a sec and send you the link on the chat. Okay. So you can just click on the link and yeah. Here is the question. What does interculturality mean to you? So you can add some words: pluriculturalism, diversity, respect. Good. Remember, link it's there on the chat. 1 minute more, and then we move on to the next slide. Okay, variety, good. Cultures as well. I love that you have it on plural, cultures. Good. And moving on, guys, then we have another question. Do you include it in your class? Or you never have thought about how to include it in your class? If you do it, how do you do it? 2 minutes, then we share. Gotta copy the link on the chat again. Okay, so we have, I try by addressing national issues and local problems. Excellent. Watching and comparing different cultures. Okay. I'm so happy to read that, guys, and know that you are thinking about critical interculturality, or at least interculturality, in your classes. We have, usually by introducing the readings, these readings are related to the understanding different cultural groups have about a topic. Awesome. I show festivals and traditions. Good. Letting our students show their culture. This is very important, of course, because in Colombia, we have a lot of diversity, even in Bogota. Right now, we have a lot of immigrants and children who come from Venezuela, and it's awesome that they can have a space to show their culture, promoting our own diversity. Good. So let me stop here. Okay. So as I told you, we are going to briefly approach to this concept of critical interculturality. Good. So to understand it better, we are going to first talk about culture. So culture, of course, is another complex concept, but we may say that it is a concept that integrates a myriad of values and practices of different communities, as you mentioned on the word map. So I want us to have a broader picture of cultures, not only talking about foreigners, but also about other groups here in Colombia, as you mentioned before, and also raizales, for example, Afro-Colombians, queer people. And also, for understanding critical interculturality, we need to acknowledge, and this is the most important part in here, we need to acknowledge that there is an asymmetry. Yeah, look at this picture that I have here. There is an asymmetry among cultures because not all of them have the same validity and power in society, whereby we can talk about hegemonic cultures, yeah, and subaltern cultures. The first one, hegemonic cultures, they impose Eurocentric, North American, even heteronormative ways of knowing and being as a global. So now, interculturality, it is a term that originated in Latin America more as a need for indigenous people in the midst of their struggles for a bicultural education, the ones that they had in the 90s. However, the authors argue that interculturality became a fashionable term and it started to be in use from different perspectives. So we have the relational and the functional perspectives that are linked just to the just to the simple contact among cultures, but hiding and even minimizing the conflict and the context of power and domination that we were talking about before with the cultural hegemony. And then there is the critical perspective, which is the one of interest for this webinar. So for interculturality to function from a critical perspective, it must make the causes of the asymmetry among cultures more visible. Yes, we want to give these communities, these subaltern communities, a voice and trying to understand what are the causes of the issues that they live. So one of these causes has to do with the concept of coloniality. Yeah, that in simple words is the relation of domination that started with the conquest of America and continues to exist nowadays. For example, examples of coloniality nowadays: the submission of non-academic knowledge experiences, like the ones of indigenous people, the establishment of a racialized power system, and even we can talk about the coloniality of being that relates to the exclusion of subaltern groups' ways of life. For example, the exclusion of transgender people. To put these situations into debate, it emerged the decolonial turn, also here in Latin America. And the decolonial turn refers to strategies and contestation forms that pose like a radical point of view, a radical change in the current hegemonic forms of power, being, and knowing. And critical interculturality, of course, involves this decolonial perspective, since one of the goals of critical interculturality has to do with acknowledging diversity, but also going beyond acknowledging diversity to understand, make visible, and resist the problems that the subaltern communities or cultures may have. Therefore, this concept of cultural diversity is of special value for the proposal of critical interculturality, because it contributes to understanding between people of different cultures to break with discrimination, with privileges of hegemonic cultures, and generate a greater social cohesion in terms of respect, interest, and solidarity. So we are talking about different ways of thinking, living, and experiencing the world from the perspectives of gender, social class, and of course, race and ethnic groups. Now, the question is this relevant for language teachers? What do you think? Let's write on the chat if you think that all of these issues of subaltern communities, of hegemonic cultures, is this relevant for us as language teachers? Okay, so Adriana says, it is a relevant topic to make everybody visible. Okay. Should be part of our everyday. Yeah, of course. So remember, we want to make these communities visible, but also we want to problematize their issues and make these issues visible as well. Teacher Hans says, definitely yes. If we are aware of the need to subvert these hegemonies, we need to be informed and act in the classrooms to promote critical intercultural scenarios for our learners. Excellent. Camila, it is super relevant because we are different and we all have different needs. Awesome. Okay. So moving on, guys. In my study, through field notes and reviews of similar studies, I found that these affect our jobs as language teachers from different angles. There's another comment in the chat. Adriana says, materials as a field of study should be relevant for all. Yeah, we're going to talk about materials. I'm glad you bring that up. So, 4 angles that I want to discuss. Number 1, I realized that culture was minimized and approached superficially through the use of the traditional English textbook. Why? Because the one that I had at that time at the school that I was working for, it mainly explored North American holidays, tourist places, celebrations, typical foods, and other items that did not allow the students to really interact with people who have different perspectives or experiences than their own, even in their immediate context, nor develop high order thinking skills, for example. Number 2, I noticed that even me and my students were highly motivated to learn English just for the benefit of an upward social mobility. However, we know that learning English goes beyond that, because learning a language, it is related to knowing and respecting cultural differences and diversity too. After I realized about that, I decided to introduce some deep cultural topics in my classes, and I noticed that there was a prevalent discomfort among students. I was teaching 4th graders at that time, when discussing topics like race, gender, social class diversity, which really caught my attention because they express their prejudices openly. In addition, as I mentioned before, the textbook and materials just reinforce these hierarchy relationships that we were talking before, because they were not people from Colombia, ethnic groups in the books, nor people gender diverse. And finally, guys, it's not here, but not to mention that we are also part of subaltern groups, of these subaltern communities, because we are Latinos teachers teaching English. And actually, there is a label for teachers to separate us between native and non-native speakers, which of course it has an impact on how teachers are perceived by each other and also by our students. Like, oh, if I take classes from a native speaker, that's going to be better because it is a native speaker. Then the question is, how can we move from this? Because yes, we are teaching English and we can talk about American culture, of course, from a critical perspective, but there are other speaking countries too. So how can we move from this to this? Yes, because we are teaching a language, and this gives us an endless possibility, guys, by going beyond the verb to be, to promote critical thinking, to make visible the diversity that exists in the context of our students, without, of course, forgetting our mission to teach and reflect on the language itself. So there are several ways to start doing that. For example, the pedagogy that you use in the classroom, have you ever thought about that? Like, are you going beyond traditional pedagogy, trying to use or apply more critical ones in your classroom? And besides the pedagogy, it is the development of materials. So I want to read here that teacher-developed materials allow professionals to exert the autonomy we still have in the schools and language academies, because of course there is some material that probably we are assigned, but sometimes we can develop some worksheets, some activities to exert this autonomy and to generate an input to critical interculturality, to this topic that we were talking before, from the discussion and validation of different ways of being that will not fit within cultural standardization present in the commercially produced textbooks. Sounds good? Probably. Is it quite a journey to do that? Well, yeah, but it is not impossible. So let me tell you a little bit about my journey during the development of my study. So first of all, I like to call this the sensitization phase because it has to do with teachers, with institutions, with parents, with students, yeah? So on first place, we need to rethink our pedagogical practices and change the way we are thinking about EFL education and how it should be in Colombia, in our context, which certainly implies transforming our identity as language teachers to become transformative intellectuals, as Giro stated, and agents of permanent change by changing this traditional pedagogy to critical pedagogies, like, for example, pedagogy of social justice, that is very popular because of Paulo Freire. The second step, once you have identified yourself as this, is to discuss this issue with your institution and with the parents as well, yeah? To make the need for change evident and highlight, of course, the benefits for children or for your students, if you teach teenagers, all of the benefits that has to promote a critical intercultural education. Lastly, and this being the most important thing, we must change the way we see our students. Stop saying, no, it's just that I don't think they can understand such complex issues because, you know, I used to think that way. And when I started to work on this, I realized that children liked it and understood these issues because they could identify with them. I remember that there was a student who recognized herself as Afro-Colombian and also understood kind of situations and struggles of this community when she didn't even know what that was. So yeah, we need to start thinking of our students as diverse subjects too, with the capacity of high order and critical thinking skills, even from a very early age. Well, after discussing these elements that justify the creation of materials by teachers, next I reflected on the ontological, epistemological, and power criteria proposed by Professor Núñez Pardo. Professor Núñez raised them to set the ground for contextualized and decolonized materials. If you're interested in reading them and if you want to create your materials based on them, I'm copying the reference on the chat in a moment. So I suggest that it is important to consider them if you want to design and implement decolonized materials in congruence with critical interculturality and diversity issues. The author proposed several criteria for each one of the aspects of the human being. So what you need to do is to identify which are the ones that best suit the needs of your context. In my case, for the ontological criteria, I decided to include students' life experiences, their own experiences in relation to these deep cultural aspects. Also multi-mode text, because you know, right now, a text can be a graffiti, some street art. And it is important that we can include that because it is appealing for students and it is also a great opportunity to foster critical thinking, as well to include different textual genres. Yeah. Finally, inclusion of context-related iconography. It is very important, guys, given that traditional English textbooks, iconography, they do not represent our people, neither our context. So we can have pictures of students, pictures of the people who work at school. That's very valuable. Next, for the epistemological criteria, I have decolonization of knowledge and empowerment, because of course, as teachers, this is a great opportunity to empower ourselves as researchers, as material developments, and also including relevant activities that promote higher order thinking skills and articulate them with a reflective use of technology. So probably in your school, your students have their cell phone, so we can take advantage of that by including some activities on the materials that I'll show you this later on. Finally, for the power criteria, I selected this: questioning the imposition of knowledge and materials and proposing instead local educational actions. That is what I'm going to show you. Afterwards, before creating the material, I designed a self-assessment section for students to fill out. And this is going to help you to evaluate the material after its implementation. But also, if you design it before creating the material, it can also help you for the design. That's why I like to have this icon of a compass here. And for example, this one is the self-assessment section for a worksheet that I designed on ethnic groups. So let me zoom it so we can see some of the questions. So one question is, this worksheet makes me feel motivated to learn. It is very important that we can have our students motivated all the time. Of course, includes experiences connected to my reality. So this is related to the ontological criteria. Use multimode text in different text genres, contains topics of my interest, contains photos of my own context, photos of my friends, of my teachers, of the people who work at my school. Includes activities such as interpretation and discussion, not only filling the gaps, different activities to develop higher order thinking skills. Encourage me to question my own beliefs about others, yeah, to also question your own prejudices, and allows me to use a variety of learning strategies to understand the text. So here, as you can see, I'm using Spanish as well, because you want this self-assessment to be very clear for students. So just in case their English level is not so high, you can just go for Spanish. Also, there is a section here to evaluate critical interculturality on diversity issues. So we have aspects like, I recognize some causes and consequences of discrimination regarding ethnic diversity. So besides recognizing the existence of others, that's interculturality, we go beyond and we go for the critical interculturality by asking them what will be the causes and the consequences of discrimination or different issues on diversity, on ethnic diversity. Next, I understood the importance of making sense and respecting other ethnic groups different from mine. That's like a big goal there for critical interculturality. I recognize that ethnic diversity is part of my reality as a Colombian. Some of you mentioned before at the beginning of the webinar that you show our own diversity in class. And yes, of course, that's part of critical interculturality. And finally, I changed my way of thinking about the concept of race. Good. Next, I have a critical interculturality responsive pedagogy. So as I told you in the sensitization phase, I realized that it was important to move from a traditional learning teaching style, yes, from a more critical one. So yeah, we have some questions on that. Good. And finally, there is a space for students to write any comment about the worksheet. It is important to listen to them and to understand and comprehend what they are saying. If they don't feel comfortable talking about something, of course, that's something that we need to validate. Good. Okay. And this is what I did, but you can organize your materials as you want, according, as I told you, with the criteria, ontological, epistemological, or power criteria you select, but most importantly, based on the necessity of your context. So for example, instead of talking about diversity, you can talk about pregnancy and abortion with teenagers, of bullying because of different social class backgrounds, because all of these are topics that are really, really interesting for them. So I designed 3 worksheets, and they are all based on reading. So they have 2 different reading sections each. The first worksheet, it's about ethnic groups, and it's called The Only Race is the Human Race. So just with the title, you can work, teachers, with your students, asking them, what do they think? If the only race is the human race, do you agree, disagree with that? The next worksheet is understanding other ways of being. So this one is about gender. And finally, worksheet number 3, it's called Let's Speak Up for Social Justice. This is about social class and social justice, of course, as well. So the idea now is I like to show you some samples of this worksheet so we can have some ideas on how to do it in our own context. So let me stop here. And I'm going to share the materials. Oh, I'm also sharing the reference from Professor Núñez Pardo, just in case you want to read the criteria set on here. Okay. Good, so this is the material. Always, we need to start with the general learning outcome and the specific learning outcomes as well. And I love this picture because it reflects the diversity that I had in my classroom. And also it is including iconography of the context. So that's something you can do as well. So this is the first section. It's called A Rainbow of Friends. So I'm going just to show you the first section. So we have a pre-reading. We always need to have learning strategies, directions. So for this one, I decided to talk about race with this thinking routine. What do you know about race? What questions do you have? And after they completed the first worksheet, they were supposed to go back and write what they learned. Remember that this was designed for 4th graders. They were like 10 or 11 years old. Then we have this pre-reading activity to introduce new vocabulary with word maps. And we have words like this: racism, slavery, hierarchy, and students were supposed to look up the word on the dictionary and then write their own definition. And finally, a drawing. I want to show you one example of a student's answer this. So yeah, it is possible for them to understand this concept. So for example, the students say the racism is when people criticize other because of the race hierarchy, and they had the pyramid here like white people, criollos, black people. So yeah, you with drawings you can make sure that they understood. Then we have a storyboard. So remember that I told you that we can have multi-mode text, and this is one of them. A storyboard that me and the students wrote. Yeah, so you are not taking a text from other websites. Sometimes you can do that, of course, but yeah, it is also important that you can create the text yourself with the help of students. So this one, it's a conversation about racism. We have the pictures of the students again. It's important, the iconography of the context, and some questions. What is the storyboard topic? What is the most important point about the topic? What details or examples support the main idea? Do you have more examples? And finally, there is an activity of interpretation. How do you feel about this topic? And we can have a writing strategy like Oreo, which is very famous for in when you are teaching English. So it is an opportunity to work on the language, but to work on fostering critical interculturality as well. Then we have the second section. This is about understanding Colombian diversity, but also inequality. Yeah. So students had to fill out a graphic organizer that is called the discrimination path. So they define what the stereotypes are, the types of stereotypes, they have their pictures there. So it is very fun when you print this and they are working with this material in the classroom, because yes, they are excited and motivated because they are part of it. Okay, then we have the consequences of the discrimination path, so they can understand that everything starts with a stereotype and ends up on consequences like exclusion, xenophobia, racism. Then another multi-mode text, an interview that I did to an Afro-Colombian teacher who was part of the school, asking him if maybe he has or he had lived discrimination experiences. And then when students read that, they can complete another thinking routine with questions like, what were the causes of the discrimination that teacher have experienced? Was that fair? If you were the one being discriminated, what would you do? Trying to put in other people's shoes. What can you do to safely stand up against discrimination? So I want to highlight this part because after understanding all of this, yes, when your students understand that, now they need to think about, well, what can I do? In this case, they were thinking about discrimination. So it can be something little, like stop bullying my friend. Yes, so things like that. And finally, in the last part of the section, we have a brainstorming. So students had to make a list of the ethnic groups that live in our country, and also recognizing themselves as part of these ethnic groups. And to finish, there's a video on indigenous peoples in SUA. And this video, it is talking about their life experiences, but also the problems that they have with the building companies that are getting to SUA and starting stealing their territories. So remember when I told you that it was important to include technology? Well, this is a printed material. So what I did was including a QR code in the materials so that students could access the video by scanning the QR code with phone or with, if you have tablets at your school, that's another thing you can do. And after watching the video is in Spanish, and yes, that is not a problem, we can use Spanish as well and reflect about it in English. So before watching the video, I used to think indigenous people had no problems. I remember students on this part, some students wrote, I used to think indigenous people didn't exist anymore. They were just in the past with Cristobal Colon, and that was all. So after watching the video, now I think, so what did you learn? Now I know that they are losing their territory. Now I know that they are part of my locality, because the school that I work on was in Suwa, including the context always. And yeah, a lot of ideas. And finally, they go back to the KWL chart. Yeah, the one in here, to write what they learned. So this was the first worksheet, as I told you, but there are some more. Then we have the self-assessment. This was the one I showed you before. Then we have understanding other ways of being. I'm just going to show you a few things here. For this one, I asked the parents to participate, yeah, so they could also understand how important is this for their children. So for example, this parent is they're doing the household chores, so they could understand what gender roles are by looking at a picture of a classmate father. Then we wrote this poem, and in here some teachers participated, again some parents, and all of this is about gender roles, gender stereotypes. Then we have activities, again, activities to foster high order thinking skills, questions about the reading. And yeah, this is the last one I wanted to show. These are life stories. Yes, so we have life stories from Bridget Baptiste, who identified herself as part of the queer communities, so students could understand what that is, and also Claudia Lopez, the first female and lesbian major. So first we have like an approach to vocabulary: what is transgender, what is bullied, what is homophobic, what is diverse, what is sexual orientation. And this was one of the most favorite activities of the students. I am thinking from the point of view of, for example, Bridget Baptiste. Yeah, I'm thinking from the point of view of Bridget Baptiste. So how is it like to be diverse in Colombia? If I am Bridget Baptiste and I'm thinking about this, why is it important to express myself? How do I feel about discriminatory acts against me? And what will I change about society? So they are, again, taking on the character's point of view, yes, to understand how does it feel to be different, what are the problems that they face every day, and what alternatives can we have, what would you like to change? Another self-assessment section. And then the last one, it's about speaking up for social justice. So I'd like to show you another example from students' work by the end of the last worksheet, which was about social justice. So they have different drawings. Let's make a campaign to the government to have a better salary. Let's give work to others. Let's say the other people that that we cannot discriminate. Or look at this, diverse people can go to school, but making more ramps, because they were thinking like, yeah, disabled people cannot study here. And that's another very interesting topic. Yeah, they cannot study in our school because there are no ramps. So they start questioning everything. And that's the idea. That's what we want. Additionally, well, I think I'm running out of time. But yeah, I want to show you something really quick. Okay. I'm currently working on a language academy. So I was thinking like, well, now we are not in the school, we are not working with children. Is it possible to include these topics here? So, well, this is an example of a lesson plan. Of course, there are more activities, but I just want to show you the ones that are related with critical interculturality. So the language of this class was, for example, simple present and time expressions. So this is something that you can do in your class if you don't have a lot of time, yeah? Just in the example, you can start making your students think about it. Afro women usually have to deal with discrimination. They are using simple present, yes. They are using time expressions, yep. But they are talking about gender inequality, about discrimination as well. So the topic of this class, I had to introduce a lot of vocabulary about household chores. So I was thinking like, well, let's talk about then gender inequality in household chores. So most women say that they do more household chores than their husband. So with this statement, you can ask your students, do you agree or disagree with that? How is it like at home? Yeah, is it like that? What can you do to make a housework more fair? Just in the introduction. Another activity, this was like a mini task. It was about analyzing graphics. So again, use multi-mode text. That also works as that. And they had to discuss what is the bar graph about. This one is about the hours per week that women and men spend on domestic duties. So they were surprised by like, oh, I never thought about that. Look at food preparation and cleanup, 8 hours per week just by the women, and men just 3 hours. So they can start thinking about that. And again, bring that to their context. Who does the household chores in your house? I had this class this morning and they were like, my mom. So yes, it is a great opportunity to start reflecting on this. And after the discussion, so don't stop there because we always need to have like the 3 steps, like being aware of the issue, understanding what the issue is, but also trying to come up with ideas on how to reduce some of these problems from our own experiences. In this case, I asked the students, think about how can we reduce gender inequality in housework. Write your ideas on a Padlet. They had to work in groups and then sharing your ideas in the main session. So they are including their experiences, but also reflecting on the topic. So one student say, I think that in my house, we can have a spin wheel with the household chores and we can all participate to make it more fair. Or another student said, well, I think that we need to understand from a very young age that household chores are not a thing of women, for example. So we can start helping students, yeah, to reflect and also to come up with ideas. Well, as final recommendation, teachers, I'll say, first of all, we need to go beyond grammar. So stop thinking like we are language teachers and we only teach English. I used to think like that. And yes, it's very interesting when you change your mind and when you go beyond. For that, it is important to question our role as language teachers as well. And when we do that and we change the way we identify ourselves, it is important also to start reading bibliography on what is the decolonial term again, because yeah, that was a briefly explanation. So yeah, exploring that. Dig deeper, what is critical interculturality that I'd like to suggest. So the first one is Social Justice Books, a Teaching for Change project. So on this website, it's very interesting because you can find a lot of book lists. For example, Afro-Latinos, American Indians, Arab and Arab Americans. You have a lot of topics there, Black Lives Matter, civil rights teaching. So you can go and check this selection of books. So we can take advantage of YouTube, for example. You can look there like one of the titles and you are going to find it for sure as an audiobook, because I know it because I used some of these when I was introducing the topics to my students. And finally, there is this website called Teaching for Change, Building Social Justice Starting in the Classroom. And you can find a lot of resources, books, lesson plans, anti-bias education. They also have like very interesting topics there that we can explore. They have another selection of multicultural justice books for children too. So, well, that's what I had to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and start changing the way we teach English in the classroom. If you'd like to access some material, you can reach out to me. This is my email. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you so much.
Lucia, this is amazing. Definitely, I'm amazed. This is a topic I love. All the critical thinking that you are doing in your materials. This is beautiful. Some people are asking in the chat if you could please share the links before we close the meeting for the 2 web pages that you recommended for social justice and the books and the other source. If you could please send us a link.
Of course, yeah.
We know that we are all very short of time because you also have class in just a few minutes, but I don't know if somebody would like to, maybe if you have any question, you can write it on the chat. Remember that we are going to, this is being recorded and we are going to put it in our YouTube.
And also by email,
tomorrow.
you can reach out to me if you have any question. So,
okay,
yeah,
so the links are now in the chat. Thank you so much. It is a great presentation. They're saying that it was very interesting. It was a great presentation. Thank you for sharing what you are doing. Definitely what you are saying is so important. It's much more than just teaching English per se, but what are we doing with what we're teaching and how is it that we're enhancing and fostering critical thinking and making our part in changing the world, you know? That's finally one of the reasons why we are all here. I don't know if anybody has any other question or comment, please remember in the chat, it says thanks to the presenter and as a copy. Remember that AIDA is part of one of our special interest groups. We have 4 special interest groups. AIDA is part of materials development. Thank you so much, Aida, for joining us today. And everybody, remember that we will be seeing you in Medellin. I want to share with you, it says, thank you. Everything was clear and helpful. Congratulations, well done. We appreciate you, what you are doing in our community. I am sure your students are the ones taking advantage of your critical intercultural lessons. Thank you very much, Luzaida. We will be sending you all these messages because we know that you're in a rush. You have class in 3 minutes. To everybody else, I will leave the session open for a couple of minutes so you can copy the links. This session will be in our YouTube channel where we have all our webinars and all the activities that we held in as a copy. So probably by tomorrow, you're going to have access. And thank you, Luzaida. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. See you.
Everybody, please remember that we will be having our conference in Medellin, and we have another webinar coming soon. We are having another webinar with one of our partners, that is Voces Digital, for storytelling as part of our EFL curriculum to boost class engagement. This is going to happen on August the 18th, and we hope that you can all join us for this day. Remember that we're going to meet you also in Medellin in October from the 13th to the 15th, and you can find all the information about our national and international congress in our asocopy.org. We will let Aida know all the comments that you're posting in the chat. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope to see you all very soon.